The episode fades up on Tony, and the camera walks around him, one side of his face and then the other, and as it swings, it picks up Meadow standing behind him. Then they start talking, and it's over, and nothing in the scene draws any attention to it. About 50 minutes later, after the worst thing the show has let us watch him do, he's standing in an admissions office at Bowdoin waiting for his daughter to come out of an interview, and there's a line from Nathaniel Hawthorne mounted on the wall, and he reads it. No man can wear one face to himself and another to the multitude, without finally getting bewildered as to which one may be true. So the hour opens by showing you both sides of a man's face and ends by telling you what's supposed to happen to a man who has two of them, which is about as plainly as a show can say what it thinks it's doing. It isn't true of him, though, and I don't think the episode believes it is either. Hawthorne's promise is that the two faces interfere with each other eventually, and that the interference, the getting bewildered, is the punishment. What happens instead is that Tony tells his daughter something true about himself in the car, and is more direct about where his money actually comes from than he usually lets himself be in therapy, and then the next morning he kills a man with a length of wire behind a travel agency in Maine, and then he collects her and drives her to the next college, and those two things never once rub against each other. He doesn't come back altered. He comes back with dirt on his shoes and a cut on his hand, which is a laundry problem and a lie he's going to need, and he handles both about as well as you'd expect. And it isn't only him. Almost everyone in this hour is trying to get out of something. A marriage, the life, a family business, a lie they've been running for years, and the episode is generous enough to let the attempts work. It's the 5th episode. It went out in February of 1999. James Manos Jr. and David Chase wrote it. Alan Coulter directed it. And it's the one people name when they're asked to name one. It won the Writing Emmy that year. It's also the episode Edie Falco won her first Emmy for, which gets forgotten, because the college trip takes all the oxygen out of every conversation about this hour, and the half that happens back in New Jersey ends up treated like a subplot when it plainly isn't one. What everybody does remember is that Tony kills a man with his own hands halfway through it, and that very nearly didn't happen, because HBO didn't want it in there. Chris Albrecht's position was that 5 episodes in the show hadn't earned it. You can't ask an audience to keep watching a man who strangles an informant to death and suffers nothing for it, not this early, wait until the end of the season. Chase's answer was that a Tony Soprano who finds this guy and doesn't kill him is full of it, and so is the show. There was a compromise, though. Albrecht wanted the man Tony kills to read as something that had to be dealt with, and the episode duly goes out of its way with him. He's dealing drugs. He aims a gun at Tony in a car park, while Tony's walking his drunk daughter back to their room, and the next morning he tries to talk 2 local addicts into finishing the job. So the only person in this hour who actually left the life had the dice loaded against him before we met him. Anyway, Meadow comes out of admissions and reels off the numbers and the credentials and whatever else they hand you on a tour.
Bates is the world's most expensive form of contraception.
Hey, what kind of talk is that? You mean the girls at the other colleges we've been to, they just put out?
Then she asks why he left college, and it turns out he went. Seton Hall, a semester and a half. His parents were working people, and education wasn't something they thought about, and he offers that, and then immediately declines to hide behind it.
Can't lay it all off on them. I got into a little trouble when I was a kid.
I heard.
You did?
Mm-hmm.
So the whole trip is a father buying his kid a thing he had for a semester and a half and lost, and every campus they walk around is somewhere he'd have had no idea what to do with. He isn't nostalgic about it, and he doesn't turn it into a lesson for her. It's just information handed over. And that's the warm part of the trip, the part where they're just a father and a daughter in a rental car in New England, and it lasts until they get back in the car, and Meadow asks him if he's in the mafia.
Am I in the what?
Whatever you want to call it. Organized crime.
That's total crap. Who told you that?
And she's ready for it because she didn't come with a feeling, she came with an exhibit.
I've seen police come with warrants. I've seen you going out at 3 in the morning.
So you never seen Doc Cusimano go out at 3 in the morning on a call?
Did the Cusimano kids ever find $50,000 in Krugerrands and a .45 automatic while they were hunting for Easter eggs?
The Cusimanos being the neighbors, the doctor's family. Somebody hid a felony in the garden and then held a children's event in the same garden, and nobody in that house is ever going to mention it again. She's telling him something else too, which is that she has a control group. She knows what the houses either side look like from the inside, so he tries waste management. Then the thing about people seeing an Italian with a truck and assuming he's a gangster, which is a real grievance, and he's using it as cover, and he knows he's using it as cover. And when that doesn't hold either, he plays the last card in the deck. There is no mafia, which is a man being walked backwards. He doesn't open with a grand denial, he arrives at it, having tried two smaller things first, and then he gives ground.
All right, look, some of my money comes from illegal gambling and whatnot.
And then he asks her how she feels about that, which is Melfi's question, word for word, the move a therapist makes when something heavy lands on the table. 4 episodes on that couch, and he's running it on a teenager in a car, and it works about as well on her as it does on him. Now, before the machinery of that gets interesting, the concession is real, and I don't want to sneer at it. He wasn't cornered. She had no leverage. She's a kid. She'd have let it go eventually, and he could have kept lying for another 20 years. He tells her because she asked and because she'd earned an answer, and it's about the most voluntary admission he ever makes to anybody. It's also in the way it's built, damage control of a very high order. He hands her a real crime, verifiable, admittable, small, and the size of it does the work. Once he's confessed to gambling, "Are you in the mafia?" has technically been answered, and the answer was no with a caveat. She got something, and getting something is what ends an interrogation. Then she answers his question, and the answer is that it's fine.
Kids in school think it's actually kind of neat.
Seen The Godfather, right?
Not really.
She doesn't say I like it. She says the kids like it, hands the benefit off to a third party in the sentence where she reports receiving it. 30 seconds in, and she's already found a way to enjoy the standing without owning the enjoyment. Then she starts building his case for him. Other dads are full of it too, she says, and she's got one ready. Her friend Hunter's father, who does advertising for a big tobacco company, which moves Tony out of the category of criminal and into the category of men who make money in ways that hurt people, a much larger and more comfortable category that includes most of the nice houses in New Jersey. And she isn't lying to herself. The tobacco guy does enormous harm with a clean job title and will never see a courtroom, and noticing that is a perfectly bright thing for a teenager to do.
Ugh, so many dads are full of shit.
And I'm not.
She's handed him an exemption, and he's checking whether it's real.
Finally told the truth about this.
The tobacco father is contemptible because he pretends. Her father is bearable because he didn't. She has just informed a man whose entire operation runs on plausibility that candor buys him standing with her, and he is listening. And then he starts backing away from it. Tells her part of his income comes from legitimate business, the stock market, reaching for the portfolio, the thing that sounds like the other fathers.
Part of my income comes from legitimate businesses, stock market.
Look, Dad, please, okay? Don't start mealy-mouthing.
She isn't asking him to be better, she's asking him to be plain, and given the choice between a father who does crime and admits it, and one who does crime and talks about equities, she takes the first one every time. So the arrangement gets made in about 90 seconds, and neither of them notices that a rule rewarding candor is, for a man in his line, not a restriction, it's a discount. But I've been talking about this as though it's his scene, and it isn't. Before that conversation, she had a gun and $50,000 in gold in the Easter eggs, police at the door with warrants, a father who leaves the house at 3 in the morning, and nothing to do with any of it except not think about it, which is the position of a clever kid in that house. All the evidence, no permission to have drawn the conclusion, so every day she has to be slightly stupider than she is. What he hands her isn't the information. She had the information. What he hands her is permission to stop pretending, and a story in which loving him doesn't make her a fool. She's not deceived at the end of that drive. She's relieved. Nobody had to lie to her. That's why it closes so quietly. They're closer at the end of that drive than at the start, and it isn't fake closeness. The affection in that car is real, and it stays real for the rest of the episode. Nothing about his life has changed. There are just 2 people keeping it standing now. A little further up the road, they stop for petrol, and Tony goes to the phone. He calls Irina first. Her cousins got married, and she hasn't got anything, and she'd like him to hear about it, which, strip the accent and the self-pity off, is a woman telling a married man she'd like a life. He listens to as much as he can stand and hangs up. Then he calls Carmela, who's home with the flu, and asks how she's feeling, and means it. And while she's talking, he goes quiet, because there's a man across the forecourt cleaning his windscreen. He tells her he'll call her back from the motel. Clean sentence, no fumbling, nothing left behind for her to wonder about, and he's gone. The other man catches sight of him on the way to the car, gets a short look at his face, and drives off. Mistress, wife, and the man he's going to kill, in that order, out of one phone booth, while his daughter waits in the car. No music cue, nobody says anything wry. The camera doesn't pull back to let you admire the arrangement. You could tell me I'm making a meal of a guy making 2 phone calls, and if you weren't looking for it, you'd read it as efficient plotting, which it also is. But 3 lives run through that booth back to back, and there's no gear change between any of them. Whatever Hawthorne thinks happens to a man keeping this many faces going, the sensation of it here is mild irritation with a woman on the phone. Then he becomes reckless in the one way he never is, which is that it puts Meadow inside the consequences. Back in the car, off after the guy, into oncoming traffic at one point, with his teenage daughter in the passenger seat. And she's telling him to turn. The exit for Colby is right there, the college they drove to Maine to look at, the entire stated reason for the trip, and she's saying it out loud, more than once, and he goes straight past it. He doesn't argue with her. He just doesn't hear her, an hour after telling her they were the kind of father and daughter who talk to each other. Somewhere in it, she asks what's going on, and he says he thought he saw an old friend. Then he pulls in at a motel, and when she brings it up again, it wasn't him. Technically, those two fit together. He thought he recognized somebody, and he was wrong. That's why they're usable. The problem is the driving. Nobody goes into oncoming traffic with their kid in the car over a man they might know. She doesn't push. She files it, and it's the first item on a list that's going to get long, and she's a good detective, and nobody in this family is ever going to thank her for it. He's a better liar than this normally. The reason he's worse here is that he's already spending most of himself on the other problem, where a man he last saw 10 years ago is living, whether the paper on him is still open, who he needs to call to find out. Meanwhile, 300 miles south, Carmela has the flu, AJ's been packed off to a friend's for the night, and the doorbell goes. It's Father Phil unannounced, at an hour when a woman is alone in a large house. She calls out to ask who it is, because she's ill and she knows she looks it, and when the answer comes back, Father Phil, she doesn't open the door. She goes back upstairs to the bathroom, does her hair, puts perfume on, checks herself over, and then comes down and lets him in. That's a lot of steps for a man in a collar, and nothing has happened yet, and she can still tell herself nothing is going to. She just wanted to be looked at properly by somebody once on an evening when she has the flu and her husband is in another state. He comes in and makes his confession, which is that he has a Jones for her baked ziti. Tony calls him Monsignor Jughead, which is the funniest read anybody gives this character and also the correct one. Father Phil eats. He circulates among these women, and they cook for him, and he brings the films and the conversation about faith, and they bring the food and the wine and the loneliness. I don't think he's a fraud, exactly. I think he believes he's doing pastoral work, and the pastoral work and the free dinner and the attention of an unhappy, beautiful woman have never once been separated in his mind, because nobody has ever made him separate them, which puts him closer to the man up in Maine than the episode says out loud. 2 men who take what women put in front of them, the food, the attention, being admired for an evening, without accepting any of what those women actually want back. And both have an institution behind them supplying a respectable word for the appetite. Phil calls his a Jones for the ziti. Tony calls his waste management and then the stock market. Then the phone rings, and it's Dr. Melfi calling to reschedule. And Carmela finds out from a stranger's voice on her own telephone that her husband's psychiatrist is a woman. She's at an affair inside a minute and fairly convinced of it by bedtime. The thing that makes that worse than a misunderstanding is that back in the pilot she'd assumed the psychiatrist was a man, said so, and Tony simply let it stand. He didn't lie. He declined to correct her, which is the cheapest deception available, and it's been sitting there quietly for 4 episodes doing nothing until a receptionist's courtesy call sets it off. So in the same hour that hangs a quotation on a wall about the impossibility of keeping 2 faces going, his entire cover on this front consists of having once not bothered to say, actually, she. They settle in with the wine and the ziti and a film, and the film is the remains of the day. 2 people spending an evening on a man who works out what his silence cost him only once the chance is gone, and then goes back to the same house that taught him to keep quiet. They get into Casablanca as well, and The Last Temptation of Christ, which Carmela didn't buy because she couldn't accept Willem Dafoe as Jesus. She watched it, she thought about it, she has opinions on the depiction of Christ in cinema, and she landed on casting. And then, somewhere in the wine, it stops being a pleasant evening. She tells him she married someone evil that she knew.
Allowing what I know is evil in my house. Allowing my children, oh my God, my sweet children, to be a part of it. Because I wanted things for them. I wanted a better life. I wanted this house. Wanted money in my hands. I'm so ashamed.
She has forsaken what is right for what is easy, and it's a matter of time before God settles the account. And she says she hasn't made an honest confession in 20 years. Which is not a woman losing her composure over wine. She's been sitting in that church every week for 2 decades, handing over an edited version, and tonight she stops editing. That's a decision. I don't think anybody in the first season says anything more accurate about themselves. There's no self-pity in it. It doesn't blame Tony. It doesn't reach for circumstance. It doesn't say I didn't know or what could I do. She names the trade she made, in the language of her own faith, which is the language where it counts hardest against her, and then names the bill she expects. Falco won the Emmy for this, and this is why. And Chase cuts from her saying that straight to Febby Petrulio, loading a gun in a motel car park in Maine. Then Father Phil gives her communion, right there in the house, a tablet with a cross stamped into it, wine mixed with something, carried over in a bag, and the camera goes in very close as she takes it, and he doesn't absolve her. He tells her she has to genuinely repent, renounce it, mean it, and then God will absolve her. She says she'll try. The whole marriage in 2 words, offered to a priest as a statement of intent, and he takes it and moves straight on to communion. So the confession never closes. She hasn't committed to anything, both of them know she hasn't, and the ritual proceeds anyway. Something real happens to her in that room. She says the true thing out loud to a priest, she takes the bread, and she is lighter afterwards. The weight comes off without a single condition being met, without her giving up anything, without the house or the marriage or the arrangement moving by 1 degree, and it'll need to come off again in a couple of seasons, and it will. That's the exit, and it isn't that the church fails her. She walks straight through it. She does the hard part, which is seeing herself clearly and saying so out loud, and she gets exactly what's supposed to follow, and it puts her back where she started with the pressure released, which is the one outcome that guarantees she'll still be standing there when it builds again. They fall asleep in each other's arms after the communion, which is not nothing. AJ rings to say he's staying at his friend's, so the house is theirs for the night, and both of them know it. And they get close enough that it's about to happen, and then Father Phil's stomach turns over, and he has to go and be sick. There's a widely held reading, and it's a reading rather than something the show states, that the nausea is covering for something rather more embarrassing and rather more conclusive. Either way, it's his body that ends the evening. Bodies keep doing the deciding here. Carmela's flu is why she's home alone in the first place. Phil's stomach is why nothing happens. And Tony's body has been interrupting his life since the pilot, in an hour full of people who can describe themselves perfectly and don't move an inch. The only thing that actually stops anybody is physical. In the morning, he's the one who raises it. They didn't do anything bad last night, he says, and then immediately starts worrying about his car having been parked outside her house since yesterday evening, which is a very human order of priorities for a man in his position. She says twice that they did nothing wrong, and then he tells her it was the greatest test of his faith he's ever faced, and that it isn't that he doesn't have desires for her. He does. He's telling her so. He simply didn't act on them, which he appears to think is a gift. She makes a joke about her luck. Out of all the priests available, she got the one who's actually good. It's a joke, and she means it, and the disappointment is right underneath it. She's telling him she'd have gone through with it, which he now knows, and which is what the speech about the test was for. He got to hear that she wanted to, and got to keep his record clean. And that's this exit, which is otherwise the most genuinely open one in the hour. She could burn it down that night in about 90 seconds. An affair with the family priest doesn't survive contact with her marriage. She gets right to the edge of it, and I'd want to be fair to her, because she's lonely in a way that predates all of this by years. Her husband is in another state. She spent the evening assuming he's sleeping with his psychiatrist, and a man she likes is in the house very late. Anybody would be at that edge. What the episode won't do is tell us whether she'd have stepped over. His stomach turns before she has to decide. And in the morning, she says twice that nothing wrong happened, which is accurate, and she'll go on believing something about herself that was never actually tested. Carmela and Febby Petrulio both come out of that night with a flattering account of something they didn't do. Back in Maine, dinner is the happiest they are all trip, and it opens with him going back to the car conversation. He asks how what he told her earlier is sitting with her. She says she already knew 90% of it, which lands on him. The disclosure I've been calling the most voluntary thing he ever does turns out to have been 10% news. She'd worked out the rest years ago and was waiting for somebody to say it aloud. It doesn't make his honesty worthless. It does price it, and lower than he thought he was paying. So he starts explaining himself, and the explanation is the standard one.
You know, there was a time, Ed, when the Italian people didn't have a lot of options.
You mean like Mario Cuomo?
3 words, and the alibi is in pieces. Same generation, same background, same closed doors, and the man ended up governor of New York. She doesn't add anything, she doesn't need to, and he doesn't fight her on it, which is what makes this a scene rather than a debate. He gives ground the way he gave ground in the car. He put food on the table. His father was in it. His uncle was in it. And then, maybe he was too lazy to think for himself. He'd considered himself a rebel.
Maybe being a rebel in my family would have been selling patio furniture on Route 22.
I'm not sure there's a more revealing sentence in the first season. He's looked straight at the other life, priced it correctly, understood that it was available, and that taking it would have been the braver thing, and filed it under things he didn't do. No denial anywhere in it. He's describing a road he can see perfectly well from where he's standing to his daughter over dinner with real warmth about 12 hours before he kills a man. She asks whether anything at college interested him. He says he barely got in, and then admits he quite liked history. He liked history. He got into Seton Hall, lasted a semester and a half, can tell you precisely why he isn't there anymore, and none of the knowing has ever once put a hand on the wheel. And then, in the middle of all that goodwill, she tells him that a couple of weeks ago, she and her friends took speed to get through the SATs.
You what? I'd have slapped the shit out of you. Where did you get it?
If I thought this was going to be a lecture, I never would have told you.
Take a reality check. What do you think I'm gonna say?
She's baffled by the size of it, because from where she's sitting, she was doing the thing they agreed that afternoon. He was honest with her, so she was honest with him. Except that wasn't the arrangement he made. What he gave her was calibrated, a lesser crime, sized to close a question, handed over on his terms at a moment of his choosing. What she gives him is unmanaged. She just tells him, because she thought that's what they were doing now. And he punishes her for it inside a second, with the full force of a father who isn't going to have a daughter on speed, which is a completely reasonable position and the exact opposite of what he sold her in the car. She lets him have it. The evening goes on. I don't think she ever quite tries that again. There's a rifle mounted on the wall of the restaurant, incidentally, as decoration, hanging over the tables while a father and daughter have dinner, and nobody in the room gives it a second look, because that's what a gun becomes when you put it on a wall in a nice place, which is what happens to the Hawthorne quote at Bowdoin as well. Both objects have something dangerous in them. One can kill you, the other is a judgment on how you live, and both have been hung up, framed, absorbed into the decor of a respectable room, and made completely harmless to the people eating and interviewing underneath them. Then he hands her off to some Colby students at the bar so he can go and make a phone call, and she gets fairly drunk with them, which is its own small comedy. The boss's kid getting hammered with sophomores while he's outside on a payphone arranging a murder. The call is Christopher, and Christopher offers to drive up and take care of it, which is the sensible option and the safe one. Tony's in another state with his daughter, no crew, no equipment, and the whole thing could be somebody else's problem by tomorrow, and Chris would be delighted. Tony says no. It's something he has to do himself. I don't think that's about honor. This man gave up people he'd known since he was a kid, and then went off and had 10 good years somewhere, and Tony wants to be the one in the room for it. The practical effect is that a murder gets scheduled around a college interview, which is the arrangement the rest of the episode runs on. He calls Christopher from a payphone, gives him the number he's standing at, and tells him to go and find a different payphone and ring back on that one, so there's no line joining them that anybody could pull later. Christopher goes out in the rain to do it. A man on a college tour with his kid, 300 miles from work, nothing to do for the next day but look at admissions buildings, and the operational discipline is fully switched on. Clean line, plate to run, call back at 10. What comes back is a name and an address. The car belongs to Frederick Peters, and Frederick Peters lives here, which tells him nothing because that's what the name is for. He says he's got to make sure it's him, and he'll ring back after midnight. and in that first call telling Christopher who this man is, he mentions that Febby's been going round to colleges getting paid to talk about what a big mafioso he used to be. The one man in this episode who left found a way to sell the thing he left. He testified against these people, went into the program, got a new name, and started taking money to stand in front of 18-year-olds and be Fabian Petrulio for an hour. And the buildings he does it in are the same kind of building Meadow is being interviewed in. The institution takes Tony's money, and it takes Febby's story, and it launders either one provided it turns up in the right format. There's another college under the title as well. Febby did his time at Lewisburg, and the carving, the busts, the lips he can never get right, is a thing he picked up in a prison workshop. That's where his education happened. So the hour has a girl being interviewed at Bowdoin by an institution meant to open her future, and a man whose formation came from a federal penitentiary, and the first kind of place now pays him to talk about what the second kind made him. Both of them come out of college with a usable version of their past. So Tony finds the alias attached to a business, and the business is a travel agency. Fabian Petrulio ran for his life. Sat in rooms with federal agents naming people he'd known since he was 19, got handed a new identity, got put down in Maine, and what he chose to do with the rest of it was sell holidays. Sit behind a desk with the brochures fanned out and book other people's departures. No way of knowing whether that irony ever occurred to him or whether it was just the business that happened to be for sale. And the second is likelier and sadder. Then he goes and looks through the window of the place, which is shut, and confirms it's him. There's a wooden bust of Ronald Reagan sitting in there. Petrulio carves, picked it up inside, and he's not bad at it, except he has never once in his life managed a mouth. There's a running joke going back before any of this about a bust of Frank Sinatra he made as a gift, which Christopher took one look at and assumed was Shaquille O'Neal on the grounds that the lips needed work. A rat identified by lips he can't get right. The show does not point at that, it just puts it there. Petrulio is the only person in this hour who actually got out. Everyone else is negotiating with their life. Carmela making arrangements with hers, Tony managing his, Meadow building a story she can live in, and this man physically left. New name, new state, new wife, new kids, a job, a house with a hot tub in the back. The exit, taken all the way, and the only time in the first season anybody manages it, and he's still dealing drugs, thrown out of witness protection and still dealing. The federal government gave him a new life on condition that he live it, and he couldn't manage the condition, and nobody made him. There was no pressure from Jersey, because Jersey didn't know where he was. He had the clean slate everybody in this show says out loud they'd want, and he filled it in with the same handwriting. So the geography was never the thing. He didn't move away from the life, he moved it somewhere with worse weather. I'll say the honest thing about him, though, because there's a version of this that leans too hard on Febby Petrulio, and it isn't fair to the evidence. He's a rat by the show's rules, and a dealer by anybody's. He tries to hire 2 kids to shoot a man, and part of the reason he's so easy to write off is that the episode seems to have been shaped that way after HBO objected to the killing. So I'm not asking you to feel much about him. He's a bad man who escaped and then didn't change. What makes him useful is that his failure needs none of the excuses the others have. Nobody trapped him. He had the whole thing, free and clear, and he went back to work. That night he drives out to the address and he doesn't go in. What he finds is Petrulio in the hot tub round the back with a woman, and it's a nice evening. And then a little girl comes out of the house and says she's frightened and wants somebody to put her to bed. Tony watches that, turns around, and goes back to his car. A dog starts barking, which is what brings Petrulio out, and by then there's only a car pulling away. He doesn't see a face. There's a rule about this. Not in front of the family, not the wife, not the kids, not in the house. One of the few rules in that world that gets kept rather than just invoked. And Tony keeps it here at real cost. He's found the man. The man is in a hot tub with his guard fully down, and there will not be a better moment all week. He walks away because a little girl came outside. Now this is the strongest thing anybody can put against what I've been arguing, so I'd rather run at it than round it. The objection goes roughly like this. Hawthorne is too small for Tony Soprano. He isn't a man with 2 faces, a good one and a wicked one, swapping between them on the way to some inevitable confusion. He's the most thoroughly worked out character American television has produced, and the episode isn't splitting him along a good and evil line at all. What it's actually doing is setting his brutality next to his vulnerability. Here's a man who can kill somebody with his hands and is also completely defenseless against his daughter's questions and drives away from a sure thing because there's a child in the garden. Hawthorne's line isn't a description, it's a threat. The faces will start to interfere, you'll lose the thread. There'll come a moment where the man who drove away from the hot tub and the man who comes back tomorrow can't both keep operating, and something in you gives. Nothing gives. That's what took me a while to see about this scene. It looks like evidence of a conflict inside him, and it isn't, because the rule he obeys here isn't in tension with what he does the next morning. It's part of the same system. Not in front of the kids, and he has to die are issued by the same authority, and following one clause costs him nothing against the other. He's not torn between the father and the killer, because he has a set of rules that comfortably holds both, and the rules told him to wait, so he waited, and then the rules told him to go ahead. So he sleeps fine, or as fine as he ever does. And that little girl asking to be put to bed is the cruelest thing in the hour, because it's the same fact from two angles. Tony spares her father tonight on account of her and kills her father tomorrow morning. Same man, same rule, and she grows up without a father either way, just with a night's delay and an unmarked spot where the explanation should be. Nobody's going to tell her anything. Her mother won't know either. There's a bit of housekeeping going on here as well, on Tony's behalf. Kill him in that garden, and the man dies as somebody's husband and somebody's father in front of them, and the audience has nowhere to put it. Instead, he dies alone behind a travel agency the next morning, having spent the intervening hours trying to hire two kids to shoot a man in a car park with a teenager standing there. The delay does an enormous amount of work, and the person it works hardest for is Tony. While Tony's been doing all that, Petrulio has been working too. He gets to the motel and finds the guest register, and the camera goes down onto the page with him, and there it is in somebody's handwriting. Soprano. Soprano. 10 years of being Fred Peters, and the name is sitting in a ledger in a town he picked because nobody in it had ever heard it. Whatever he'd been telling himself about the car outside his house is finished. So that night, when Tony comes back with Meadow, Petrulio is in the car park with a handgun. The show gives us his point of view down the sights. He's got him. Tony's got an arm round his drunk daughter. He isn't looking. He isn't armed. And it's the easiest shot anybody in this episode is offered. And then a couple from one of the other rooms comes out, an older pair, sorting something out about their key. Petrulio's attention starts going back and forth. The couple, then Tony, then the couple, and while he's dividing it up, the chance closes. Tony gets Meadow through the door, she tells him she loves him, they go inside, and Petrulio leaves. The episode won't tell you why he doesn't fire. There's no beat where he looks at the girl and lowers the gun. There's a man with a weapon, a couple 20 feet away fussing with a key, his eyes going between them, and then it's gone. Whether it was the daughter or the witnesses or his nerve going while he decided, the scene won't say, and I doubt he could tell you either. Which matters, because in a few hours he's going to explain it. He'll tell Tony he had him and didn't take it, on account of the girl, and he won't be lying exactly. He'll be reaching into a moment that had 3 or 4 things in it, and coming out holding the one that does him credit. The next morning he drops Meadow at Colby for her interview and tells her he left his watch back at the hotel. Not business. Nothing with any weight in it. He's going to go and kill a man, and the cover he reaches for is that he's forgotten something in a room. The smallest lie available, and the most ordinary, the sort you'd tell about a dry cleaner. The sort nobody asks a second question about. First real test of the arrangement they made in the car, and he doesn't even reach for a good one. He reaches for the one that ends the conversation fastest. Petrulio's having a worse morning. He's got 2 local kids in his office, and he's trying to talk them into killing Tony for him.
You follow him. An hour out of town, you pull up alongside, boom, 12 gauge.
Fuck that.
Lon, you do what I ask, so you'll never get another bag off me. I would have done it myself last night, but some people came along.
Same event he'll describe to Tony in a couple of hours as an act of mercy. Here this morning, with nobody worth impressing in the room, it's a logistics problem. They're not keen. So the supply stops. He tells them, no more bags. Still not keen. So he plays the last card, which is that he knows who burned down the historical house, and he'll tell the police. 10 years clear of everybody he ever knew, handed a name and a town, and nothing to do but live in it, and what he's built there is a drug supply to local kids, and enough dirt on them to make them do things. He didn't rebuild the life he came from. He rebuilt his position in it at a smaller scale with worse material. 2 addicts weigh up a paid murder and decide it sounds like a hassle. Then he hears something outside, takes his pistol, and goes to look. And it's a deer standing in the brush, entirely uninterested in him. He gets a second of relief out of it, the ordinary relief of a jumpy man finding there's nothing there. Then Tony has him from behind with a length of wire. The episode never shows him preparing for it. No scene of Tony picking anything up, no equipment, no getting ready. The wire is simply in his hands when the moment comes, and where it came from is not information the show thinks we need. And that absence is the most important thing in the sequence, because the other version of this scene is one where he arrives with a garrote he brought from New Jersey. That would make it a job. A separate mode with its own tools, entered and left, walled off from the man on the college tour. What we get instead is a decision made at a petrol station and carried out the next morning with whatever was to hand, between two campus visits, by a man who then goes and picks up his kid. He didn't need to prepare because it isn't a mode he has to enter, and Petrulio talks.
You took an oath, and you broke it.
I could have killed you last night. Your daughter was drunk, remember? I had a gun, but I didn't do it. Because of her, I told myself, taking this little girl to college.
You know, one thing about us wise guys, the hustle never ends.
So the last thing Febby Petrulio does is tell a partly true story about himself to a man who's already decided, and the man dismisses it, and happens to be right. The one time all week that Tony's flat refusal to believe anybody could mean it turns out to be the correct read. He kills him for breaking the oath and says so, and the two of them have now done the same thing in opposite directions, a few hours apart. Tony stood outside this man's house with him sitting in a hot tub and walked away when a little girl came out asking to be put to bed. Petrulio stood in a car park with a gun on Tony and didn't fire while Tony had his daughter under one arm. 2 men, 2 delays, 2 daughters, and both delays can be told as a story about a child stopping violence. Tony's is the cleaner one because the scene hands us the girl as the cause, and he never says a word about it to anybody. Petrulio reaches for the same explanation the next morning, and everything around his moment makes it harder to separate the child from the witnesses and the nerve. Neither delay changed anybody's intention. The girls bought a night each, which is about all anybody's daughter can buy in this world, and both men meant to try again. Tony just got there first. A word about how it's shot, because this is the rare case where a scene aging badly ends up helping. The killing doesn't have much punch. It's oddly bloodless for what it is. People have pointed out for years that a man with a wire around his throat shouldn't be able to hold a conversation, and next to what this show does to people later on, it looks almost polite. I don't think that's only a limitation. Whatever the intention was, what it produces is a murder that plays like a task being completed. No crescendo, no horror. If it had the savagery of the ones in the last 2 seasons, it would be a scene about rage, and this isn't. He came to do a thing, he did it, and then he went to get his daughter. And then it's over, and the body's left there behind the office, and Tony looks up. There are ducks going over, and he watches them. Properly watches, stays with it, and the shot doesn't hurry him along. It's the only image in the hour that holds him still. Now you know what the ducks are for. The show told us in the first episode, and it was direct about it. They came to his pool. He loved them past all reason. They left, and he went down on his own patio. What they mean to him is his family going out the door. That's the fear that put him in a psychiatrist's office, and the first one he ever manages to name properly. So here's where they turn up again. Behind a travel agency, over a body, moments after making a girl fatherless. I don't think he's being reproached. I think it's worse than that. He's just turned another man's daughter into the thing he lies awake about, and the sight of birds going over pulls him straight back to his own house and his own kids, and none of it connects. The feeling arrives intact and travels nowhere. He can be genuinely moved, standing over what he did, by an image of family, and the family in the image is his. It's the one place in the episode where you can watch the engine turning. It isn't that he lacks the equipment. He's got all of it, the tenderness and the dread and the capacity to be stopped in his tracks. It just doesn't extend past the edge of his own household, and the episode gives us no sign that he ever tries to make it. The man on the ground behind him was in a hot tub the night before with a kid who wanted putting to bed, and Tony saw her and drove away and came back. Then he gets in the car and goes to Colby to collect his daughter from her interview. She's been building a case since the petrol station, and by now it's a good one. He chased a stranger's car through oncoming traffic and then told her 2 different things about who the man was. He made calls from a payphone at 1 a.m, which is a strange choice for a man with a telephone on the nightstand of his own room. He missed her interview to go back for a watch and came back late from it. And now they're in the car heading for Bowden, and there's dirt on his shoes and there's blood on his hand. Give that list to anybody, and they land where she lands. His first move is to tell her she was too drunk that night to remember properly, which I'd call nasty rather than tactical. It isn't a lie about facts. It's a suggestion that her mind isn't reliable, and it comes less than a day after he told her they could be straight with each other. It also doesn't work. She was drunk and she remembers fine, so he uses the other thing. He tells her she's going to start hurting his feelings in a minute, and when she comes back at him with what he said in the car, that they have that kind of relationship, he agrees with her completely, and says it takes two to tango, meaning, I gave you the truth about my life, and now you're standing there asking about my hands like I'm a suspect. She stops. There's a pause. She says nothing, and then she tells him she loves him, and he says it back. The thing he built in that car the first afternoon, the honesty, the closeness, the sense that these were a father and daughter who could handle the truth about each other, is the tool he picks up the next morning to shut down an investigation into a murder. Not a metaphor for the tool. He reaches for the exact language of that conversation and uses it to make asking questions feel like a betrayal of the intimacy the questions came out of. And he isn't even being cynical about it, or not entirely. He does love her. The hurt is at least half real, because part of him is genuinely wounded that she's looking at him like that, and that's why it works. The gaslighting failed because she could feel it was a maneuver, and this succeeds because it mostly isn't one. Telling the truth was never going to change anything, but that isn't quite the finding. The finding is that telling the truth produced the mechanism that keeps everything the same, and produced it faster than anybody would guess. One night. That's the gap between some of my money comes from illegal gambling and stop asking about the blood. I'd say one thing for her, though, before this becomes a story about a girl who chose the lie. She's a teenager. Her father is a violent man, and she has just worked out in a moving car in the middle of nowhere with 100 miles still to go that he has probably killed somebody this morning. There is no good next question. Every version of pressing him ends somewhere she can't come back from, and she knows it, and she is also in a car with him. That isn't cowardice, and it isn't complicity yet. It's a kid finding the edge of what she can afford to know and stopping there, which is the most reasonable thing anybody does in this episode. The edge just doesn't move afterwards. She'll find it again at Jackie's funeral, and again years later when she's talking about the law, and each time she stops in roughly the same place with a better vocabulary for why she stopped. Then they get to Bowden. Meadow goes in for her interview, and he sits down on his own, and there's a Hawthorne quotation on the wall. He strangled a man earlier that morning, and the camera stays on his face while he reads it, which is the episode giving him every opportunity. If something were going to move, this is where we'd see it. There's a whole tradition of stories that quote belongs to, and it's a big one. The double life, the man who can't hold the halves together, the crack that opens and widens until something gives. Those stories have a shape, and the shape is that the two faces eventually meet. You cannot do this indefinitely. The strain accumulates, and one day you look in a mirror and can't answer a simple question about yourself. It's a moral guarantee dressed as a psychological one, and it's comforting because it means the arrangement is unsustainable and the man is not getting away with it. The show hangs that promise on a wall in the last 10 minutes of its best episode and declines to pay it, which is why it sits after the killing rather than before. Before, it's foreshadowing. After, it's a test the episode has already run and we watched it run. And the camera did that slow walk round his face at the top of the hour, right side and then left, which felt like it was promising the same thing the plaque promises. Two sides. It was, and it wasn't. There are two sides to him. They just never have to meet. He isn't bewildered about which one is true, and that's the horror in it, if there's horror in it. Hawthorne's bewildered man is at least suffering. He's paying attention. He's lost. The confusion is a kind of conscience operating badly. I want to be careful how far to push that, though, because this is the show where a man goes down in his own garden and ends up in a psychiatrist's office, and because of what happened behind the travel agency with the birds. Something in Tony Soprano is plainly not well, and it comes out sideways. The panic, the rage, the dread about his family going. The claim isn't that he pays nothing, it's that whatever he pays never arrives as knowledge. He can tell you what he does and who his father was and what he might have been instead, and none of it is ever in doubt for him, and none of it has ever once asked him to do anything differently. And then a student walks through the shot on the way to somewhere and mentions that Hawthorne is their most famous alumnus, which is what the sentence is to everybody in that building. A fact about the school. It's on the wall the way a rowing trophy is in a cabinet, and the students walk past it every day of their lives, and a man who murdered somebody before lunch is sitting underneath it waiting for his kid, and neither of those things is going to trouble the other. And then Meadow comes out of her interview. They get back to New Jersey and Carmela tells him, straight away and unprompted, that Father Phil stayed the night. And Tony's delighted. He's got something. The whole routine about the priest sleeping over while he was away, Monsignor Jughead, enjoying himself enormously, partly because it's funny, and partly because a man who spent the trip doing what he's just done will take a moral advantage wherever one is going. Then she mentions that Jennifer Melfi called.
Jennifer?
And he's finished. Standing in his own kitchen trying to construct a sentence about why he never got round to mentioning that his psychiatrist is a woman, and there isn't one, because the answer is that he let her assume and enjoyed the room it gave him.
I just thought you'd think it was weird if I saw a woman psychiatrist, that's all.
The last thing that happens in the hour where Tony Soprano murders a man with his own hands is his wife catching him out on a technicality about a doctor's first name, and it lands as the bigger defeat, because it's about the only thing on the whole trip that costs him anything he notices. And the person who did the most damage this week never appears. Melfi isn't in this episode. She's a brief voice on a telephone. But Tony carries her language up to Maine and uses it on his daughter in the car, and her scheduling call is what sets Carmela off and puts her on the sofa with a priest, and her first name is the thing that beats him in his own kitchen at the end. Therapy's been out of the office for a while by now. It's in the car, it's in the house, it's in the marriage, and the two people it's happening to have no idea that's what they're dealing with. Tony comes back from Maine. Carmela comes out the other side of her own night, and neither of them is going to say what happened. She isn't going to describe the evening with the priest, and she's right that nothing happened, and the accuracy of that is doing a lot of work for her. He isn't going to describe the travel agency. So they find the one thing about each other that can be said out loud, a sleepover, a first name, and trade those, and the trade cancels out, and they go to bed. Which isn't a marriage built on lies, quite. It's a marriage with a working system for turning the unspeakable things into speakable ones, and then settling up in the smaller currency. And look at what everybody does when the real word for something turns up. Meadow says mafia and gets back waste management, then illegal gambling, then legitimate business, then the stock market. 4 names in one conversation, each more respectable than the last, and the thing being named never moves an inch. Fabian Petrulio becomes Frederick Peters, which works legally for 10 years right up until his own hands give him away. Carmela can live with a psychiatrist for 4 episodes and can't live with Jennifer. Father Phil is a threat until Tony calls him Monsignor Jughead, at which point he's a joke about a comic book character and no longer a man who slept in the house. And Carmela and Phil settle on a night where nothing happened, which is true and does the job of a lie. The word changes much faster than whatever's underneath it, and everybody has worked out how to use the gap. One word swapped for another, in a sentence, and the life underneath it untouched. And there are 3 machines running in this hour for saying difficult things out loud. Therapy, which Tony's been in for 4 episodes, and has picked up enough of to use on his own daughter. Confession, which Carmela uses on a priest in her dining room. And the arrangement the two of them make on the drive to Colby, which is the homemade version of the other 2. All 3 work. Each does exactly what it advertises. The true thing gets said, the pressure comes off, and the person who said it goes back to their life with the arrangement intact and slightly easier to live in. None of them makes actual change the price of immediate relief. That's what joins Maine to New Jersey, and it's why the half of this episode people treat as a subplot isn't one, so nobody here fails to see themselves. The clarity is all there. It just isn't the first step toward changing. For these people, it's the thing you do instead, and it works, and it's cheaper. There's something else going on underneath the trip, though, and it runs a generation deep. The money that pays for Bodone is the gambling he admitted to in the car and everything he didn't, and Meadow is the point where that money stops looking like what it is. It goes in as tuition and comes out as a degree, then credentials, then a profession, and somewhere in there the family stops being people who did things and becomes people who came from somewhere difficult. That's one familiar way compromised money turns respectable across a couple of generations, and this family is running it fast because the daughter is clever, which is why her comparison to the tobacco executive is more than a rationalization and a bit chilling coming from a teenager in a car. She's right that respectable work does terrible harm behind a clean job title. She's noticed the actual thing. And what she does with the insight is not turn it on the whole arrangement, which she could, she's certainly bright enough, but use it to move her father closer to the men with the nice houses. Her intelligence doesn't protect her from the story. It makes the story a better one. So college launders more than the money. It launders the vocabulary and the class position, and eventually the family's account of itself. The crimes turn into a background, a hard luck story about where they came from, and everything the crimes bought stays right where it is. People call this a standalone episode, and Chase has said it's one of his favorites partly for that reason, and I understand why. You could hand this hour to somebody who's never seen the show and they'd be fine. But it isn't standalone at all. Carmela's suspicion about Melfi, which starts with a scheduling call, is a conversation about divorce a couple of episodes later. Nothing in this show sits still, and the reason college is the episode people name isn't the murder. Plenty of shows have murders. It's the first hour where the series demonstrates that it isn't going to give you the thing the genre owes you. No reckoning, no crack widening, no man undone by the strain of his own double life. It puts the promise on the wall in stone so there's no ambiguity about it, and then hands you a man who reads the promise, waits for his daughter, and drives home. Everything the show does for the next 6 years runs on those terms. He'll keep going to therapy, and he'll keep not changing, and the only thing that improves is how well he can describe